Hi, this is Kenny Schachter. Bear with me when I get my orientations oriented. This is the first of my new video opinion column, my new very opinionated opinion column for Spaghetti Boost. It's called Kenny Uncut. This will be the first of a weekly, or should I say a mostly weekly series of personal takes about all things art, art world, art market, and God knows what else. I'm so anxious. I look terrible. Too much stress today. World's worst curator, me. Speaking of which, I'd like to discuss the critical state of criticism today in the art world. A few things I remember from the past 30 years. Number one, I remember every time I curated a show or was in an exhibition, the only time that you would get weekly art criticism in the whole city of New York with the biggest amount of art galleries congealed together than in any other city in the world. The only regular weekly coverage was the New York Times, generally, and the Village Voice. And I curated dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of shows throughout the first 15 years of my career. And every Friday, or was it every Thursday night at midnight or whenever, myself and my peers, we'd all run to the newsagents to grab the New York Times and see if we got a review. Mostly by the critic Roberta Smith, who to this day I revere, even made a sculpture of. This is a maquette for a larger sculpture. And this woman has made me cry twice in my career. One, in the second show I think I ever curated in 1990, 91, when she told me, I clocked who she was. I don't even remember how I would have even been aware. And I told her, I started to explain the work of a show the work of a painter, Walter Stedding, that was in an exhibition I curated. And she just turned around at me and leered and said, if I needed to have art explained to me, I would never leave my apartment again to see another show. And when she left, a tear, just sort of one tear, dropped in slow motion out of the corner of my eye. And I learned my lesson never to speak to her again. Only years later, her husband, Jerry Saltz, another wonderful critic, whose work, probably the most populist art critic of all time, he said, Roberta would like to speak to you when we were at an opening at David's Werner in the 90s, and I was petrified, and she had a question about my Mini car, which was among the first to be imported into the United States at the time. And then I remember another time, Roberta reviewed me a lot more during the early part of my curatorial career than Jerry did, by the way, both of whom I've loved very much and respect. And then another time I remember the art dealer Sandra Gehring, who I exhibited my work at 25 years ago, who since closed her gallery. And she had an exhibition by the French artist Orlan, who most famously used to surgerize her face as part of her extreme body-oriented performance and photographic work. There was a very negative review by Roberta, and I remember Sandra Gehring gleefully waving the newspaper at me. She was thrilled even to be reviewed negatively by Roberta. And this was the type of thing at that time that could have a significant impact in an artist's success, career, impact, reach, art market. And I would have to say that one of the biggest transformations in the last 25, 30 years, with the advent of social media, mainly Facebook, and even more importantly, and Twitter, but most importantly, Instagram, is that critics seem to have lost their teeth. I mean, there's wonderful criticism always, just like there's fantastic art always, despite a lot of protestations and silly opinion pieces to the contrary. But I would say today there's been a significant lessening in the role of critics and the impact they can have on the day-to-day functioning of an artist, of their career, of their show's performance, and of their market. And I guess in a way, reductively and sadly, most significantly, most importantly, is how something reproduces on a smartphone. Another one of the biggest changes I've seen in 35 years. Smartphones, telephones, social media, blockchain, these types of things have been the most paradigmatic shifts I've experienced in my career. I mean, there's been more growth in the art world in 25 years previous to today than in the previous 250 years. So what I'd say has replaced the role of critics and the tremendous, I mean, you think of curators and critics of times past, curators, Bernard Berenson, I mean, there's so many, Clement, Greenberg, and the like. But I would say some of the biggest changes are social media, how important it is, and how many careers I've seen that have been tremendously moved in relationship to how accessible the work is online and how artists, galleries, etc. have cultivated an audience through their strategic use of social media, which is an art form and a science, not to mention the stupid companies that monolithically control the content, the majority of the content we consume. What was that point? As much as these things are censored and manipulated and orchestrated by these companies, now I'm kind of lost in my thought. But so the biggest changes from social media and how we communicate art and everything else amongst us is, okay, so what's changed and what's taken the place of critics besides social media? And I would say, whereas the gallery where an artist was showing in the past would have, the gallery would have the venue of which an emerging artist was presenting their work, would have as much impact as the art itself. For an emerging, unproven artist without a consensus about the quality or validity of the work or the market for that work. So I think today the foremost influence, replacing that of the voice of critics, has been private museums, collectors, mostly private museums. They've usurped not just the critics, but museums, and that's a travesty. I'm against 90% of the private museums, from Glenstone and all of them, that are redirecting enormous untold amounts of resources into these basically almost private clubs for seeing art and experiencing it, where you need an appointment or you have to drive to some godforsaken out-of-the-way location to see these premises and resources that are exorbitant, and how that money, if it was redirected to public institutions that have painstakingly developed constituencies over the years, it's a shame, honestly, unless a private museum exists in a jurisdiction where there's not pervasive government institutional support in various regimes that don't permit or don't accommodate art in an open-minded, non-censorious fashion. So anyway, I would say that it's strange because usually everything in the art world moves at lava-like pace. And yet, nevertheless, there have been some fundamental shifts in the landscape of art, artists, audiences, reception, and what contributes to formulate or to success in the art world. I think that'll be it. Thank you very much.